Welcome back to All Things Baseball Podcast. This is episode 12. It's our first interview, Matthew Carter.
Matthew Carter, local baseball expert. I thought it went great. He really proved himself.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed the episode. We got to talk, stadiums, the deadball era, recent news, just kind of...
Don't let everybody know.
No.
Save some for the interview.
Oh, yeah. All right. Let's get into it. Matthew Carter.
Welcome back to All Things Baseball Podcast. This is episode 12, and this is our first interview. You know, Johnny and I have been talking about doing an interview since we started this, and want to tell you how this one came about. So first, after the first podcast, one of my friends, prominent baseball coach in Alabama, he said, you know, you should really consider calling Matthew Carter up. He is a baseball expert, and he's right there in Huntsville. We live in Huntsville, Alabama. So I called up Matthew. Here he is. I called up Matthew. We went and had coffee.
Yep.
And I learned right away that you are a baseball expert. I mean, we had been, kind of going over some episodes and doing a lot of research. And when we met, I would bring some stuff up, and you knew it wrote. You would just and then you would give me your interpretation of it. So I knew right away that you were a baseball expert. So with that said, we wanted to learn a lot more about kind of, you and your, love for the game.
Yeah. So how did your love for baseball start? Your first, what do you remember the first thing about it?
Well, I know I started T-ball when I was a kid.
Yep.
And I played at the YMCA. I didn't do McGuckin at that point.
Okay, yeah.
And then for whatever reason, I just took a year or two off and didn't do coach pitch. And then as I progressed to elementary school, I quickly realized that a lot of my peers love sports, but particularly baseball at that time, because I think around that time it was going back to McGuire and Sosa in '98, somewhere around there. Yeah. And I knew right away early on if I was going to make friends or even acquaintances, I didn't know what acquaintance was when I was a kid, but
Right.
I had to either play baseball and or know something about baseball or just any sports in general, but mostly baseball.
So it was a social thing at first.
It was a social thing, and then it also helped that my mom, more so than my dad, was into baseball and sports in general, and also my grandfather, her dad, was into sports, and I was like, okay, well, I have somebody at home that can help me at least learn baseball and whatnot.
Right.
And so I got back, and so later I got back into playing Little League baseball at McGuckin this time.
Local park,
around third, fourth grade, somewhere around there. And then just my grandfather would buy me books about baseball and baseball history.
Awesome. I remember you saying that. I mean, you've read so many books. Are you reading something now?
Yeah, well, right now I'm currently reading the Casey Stengel biography that was written by I can't think of his name right now. Oh, Marty Appel. Yeah, came out. That came out a few years ago. I read that. I bought it at the Booklegger bookstore in town.
Right.
And I'm starting to read that. So that's why I've been reading. But overall, I have like I said, I think I told you at the coffee shop, over 200 books in my house, and the majority of that is baseball related. So I actually got rid of. Yeah, thank you. I actually got rid of some late because I just didn't have the room to keep everything.
Right.
Yeah. So
it's really grown. I mean, obviously, you started off socially, really started to get into it. You told me when we met for coffee that interesting. You had an internship at the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown,
yes,
New York.
Yep.
We were fascinated. Our producer Christina was like, "Wow, I'd love to hear about that." And as would we. How did you get into that? How did you apply for it? Just tell us how that came about and what the experience was like.
Yeah. So when I did my when I was doing my graduate studies in Syracuse University for the Museum Studies program, we had to have an internship in order to graduate, which makes sense.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, Baseball Hall of Fame was number one in just I got to apply to this thing.
Right.
And then it's just applied to some other places too, just because I didn't want to put all my eggs in a basket with the Hall of Fame.
Right. If they didn't take it.
Yeah, that would have been bad. So in January 2019, I applied online for position the baseball intern position Baseball Hall of Fame, and I applied for you had to apply for like 2 positions. So I applied for curatorial and then collections because I felt that fit the museum studies portion
Right.
better than like membership or something like that, And so I did that in January, and then the next month, February, John Odell, who at the time was the curator for history and research of the Baseball Hall of Fame, he called me, or no, I'm sorry, he emailed me and said, "Hey, let's set up an interview." And I said, "Okay." So we did an interview by phone, I think a few days later, and I thought it went well. And I told him about my love for baseball and being in the museum studies program and whatnot. And then a week after that, I was actually in class, and we were watching a movie in class, and like I get this phone call, and I'm thinking, who's calling me? And then like I see it says like Cooperstown, New York, and I'm like, oh, okay. So I excused myself from class.
Awesome.
And took the phone call, and John offered me the internship position for a curatorial relations intern at the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Oh, wow.
And of course, I accepted it.
Right.
Yep.
And after that, the whole time he's talking about, oh, it's going to be great and whatnot. I was just like fist pumping the whole time. I was like, yes, like silently fist pumping,
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I love it.
And so I started. In May, internship in May 2019. It was like the Tuesday after Memorial Day.
Okay.
Yeah, and so we did that. And my first day, John gives me this list of things of tasks that I'm supposed to do throughout the 10 weeks of the internship. It lasted 10 weeks.
10 weeks. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And at first the list looked daunting because I'm like, man, that's a lot of stuff. Thinking, man, that's a lot of stuff. I'm like, am I going to do this? And can I do this? I actually had this moment of self-doubt. I was like, can I do this? Because sometimes you just do it. You get your dream job and then you see something and you think, can I do this? I'm like, no. And then of course I'm like, this is stupid. Of course I can do this,
Right.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, John was like, okay, so there are some things on this list that we're not going to be able to get to because of time constraints, but this is a majority of like what you can expect to do, in the 10 weeks.
Right.
So, and just the task just went by like crazy. Like, the first thing I had to do was like a living Hall of Famers assessment. So I walked around the museum and found artifacts of living Hall of Famers at the time. So we're talking like 2019.
Who'd you choose?
Oh no, it was everybody. I'm sorry, it was all of the of the Hall of Famers who were living in 2019 had to go around the museum.
All of them.
That's
Yeah,
wow.
there was multiple. I mean, like
Okay.
we're talking like I don't know, like 70, 80 Hall of Famers still alive.
Still alive, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So and I did like went for all through the museum, all through the exhibits, and looked for artifacts. And there was a checklist. And then like if I found an artifact that was in the on display for the Living Hall of Famer, I'll do a check. Or if I didn't find one, I just circled it and say, hey, it's not there.
Right.
And so that was easy. And of course, I visited the Hall of Fame before in 2009.
Okay.
So and compare 10 years, 2019 and 2009, most of the exhibits looked about the same as they did back when I first visited.
Right.
So that wasn't hard for me to find like my way around the Hall of Fame.
Right.
I felt I had an advantage compared to like if they picked somebody who had never been in the Hall of Fame before. So
how many different interns were there at your time?
So altogether, including myself, there were 18 interns in the Hall of Fame.
18?
2019,
okay.
Yeah.
It's like a little fraternity. Was it male and female or all?
Yeah, it was male and female. I think it was like 10 female and 8 male, I think.
Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah.
And similar backgrounds to you, or was like everybody a little bit different?
There were some that were similar to me, that were either like in museum studies or public history, which is similar to museum studies. And then there were some people who had like different majors and whatnot that did like I said, membership, where you call people and try to get people to buy membership into the Hall of Fame with money and whatnot. And there's like public programming where they put on like different programs throughout the Hall of Fame,
right?
Like and stuff like that. So like we were all like college age. Some of them were in grad school, like myself. A good majority of them were like undergrad. But we all, we all loved baseball, and so we all got together. We all got along pretty well,
Good.
Yeah.
So they wanted you to know the museum, like the ins and outs, like knowing where everybody was.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things that stood out to you? Getting to see all these Hall of Famers daily. Just some like interesting tidbits or something you can share that maybe you didn't know beforehand going in, and then you were surprised by.
Well, I think one thing that stands out when it comes to the exhibits at the Hall of Fame, the way they are laid out and that the curatorial department does, there are exhibit scripts of where artifacts in the exhibit are going to be on display.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I found that I didn't know before. Like that's something they didn't teach me at Syracuse. It's like exhibits have scripts, and like when you think of script, you think of movies and television. You don't think museums.
Right.
No.
So learning about that was another a task I had to do, was to update 2 exhibit scripts at the Hall of Fame to like update to make sure that if the artifacts that were in the script are still on display, and if they're not, you gotta like make corrections in the script.
Okay.
Yeah, so I did for 2 of them. The one about the World Series, the Autumn Glory, it was what's called, and then one about Latin American baseball called Viva Baseball. And Autumn Glory, updating that script, that wasn't hard at all. But Viva Baseball was Viva Baseball was a whole nother ball game because
no pun intended.
No pun intended, because it's English. Both descriptions are in English and Spanish.
Oh wow!
And some of the artifacts that were supposed to be on display were not on display because some of them were like recent Hall of Fame, like people that recently got in the Hall of Fame, like Vladimir Guerrero, like he got in 2018. And when you get inducted to the Hall of Fame, if you're inducted that year, they'll have like a exhibit just for you of like displaying some artifacts either you don't or donated or the Hall of Fame has already had in the collection. So like when Vladimir Guerrero got in, some of his stuff, like maybe like a bat of his that was in Viva Baseball, got into this little display case for 2018. And then when they took it down, they didn't put the bat back in the exhibit. They put it back in storage.
Right.
So
that makes sense.
And from what I understand from John, who would tell me about Viva Baseball, is like, the guy we hired to like translate this, he didn't really do a good job. And so like trying to find the right words in Spanish was a pain.
So,
yeah.
So was that your biggest challenge there?
I would say so. Yeah. Out of that would be the biggest challenge. So like going back to your original question, I think that was the one thing that the one thing that really stood out to me, like that I learned more about,
Okay, so you got to see a lot of artifacts and a lot of history in that museum. What are some of the favorite kind of artifacts of some of the players? I know you mentioned your favorite player earlier. I'll let you expand on him, but any cool artifacts that you remember seeing? Like you were like, like just seeing that up close is like,
yeah. Well, they had. Well, first off, in the exhibit about Negro Leagues, they had like a belt buckle from a Negro League team called the Hilldale Club, which was based in Philadelphia, outside Philadelphia. It was a belt buckle of like commemorating their Eastern Color League championship win in 1923. And I'm like, well, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's something unique. Going back, in the timeline exhibit, dating back from like the 1800s to present, when it talked about the deadball era, which we're going to get to, it showed some of Ty Cobb's trophies that he won at the batting championship.
Yeah, right.
And one of the trophies was from like I guess the league was okay with it, but like it was donated by a vaudeville, I think like a vaudeville performer or singer named George Honeyboy Evans, who like put up the money to make this trophy to give it to like the batting champion.
Okay.
Wow.
So like that trophy, that huge trophy that Honeyboy Evans like commissioned to make, is there at the Hall of Fame on display.
Right.
And then like I saw, the first All-Star game was 1933.
Right.
And they had the National League wore like National League jerseys that just said National League, and they didn't wear their actual team jerseys. And I saw one from Baseball Hall of Famer and Pittsburgh Pirate great Pie Traynor.
Right.
Yeah, I was and it wasn't on display in the museum. It was actually, I was downstairs in the collections room, and they just had it laid out there. And I I was like, oh, that's cool. It's Pie Trainer's jersey,
It's just right there.
Just
Wow.
right there, just laying.
Yeah.
And just
Wow.
Was it wool? Is it heavy?
No, it was wool. Yeah. It was back in the 30s. Back then, you wore wool uniforms. It wasn't until like the 70s
Yeah.
when they got something lighter, Yeah, and just and seeing like the San Diego Chickens, one of the San Diego Chickens costumes on display,
Yeah.
And they played all day games back then.
Yes.
So imagine no night game, no cool nights,
Or there was no lights. Yeah.
all day games in the wool. Wow.
Yeah,
That's
brutal.
hard. That's hard to imagine.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Jeez.
just seeing that up close, I'm like, man, that's something else,
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So overall experience obviously must have been just amazing. 10 weeks took you from you said right after Memorial Day.
Yes.
To what, mid-August?
Early August. I think
Early
it was like
August?
August 2nd, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I mean, what was it like leaving? Like, were you ready to go? You're kind of like, I got more to do. Want to, I mean, what was it like as you were finishing up?
I felt that I accomplished what I'd set out to accomplish throughout the 10 weeks.
Right.
Obviously, I had great memories. Like, for example, on the induction weekend, like right after the induction ceremony that Sunday, I got to help install Mike Messina's plaque in the plaque gallery.
Wow.
Yeah, and this was not something that like I expected to do, but it was like one of the preparators, the guys who set up the exhibits at the Hall of Fame, who works in the curatorial department. He came to me like a month before and said, "Hey, after the induction ceremony, myself and some other people in the curatorial department, we're going to install the new inductees plaques." And he said, "You are more than welcome to help install a plaque." Wow. And of course, I immediately said, "Yeah, absolutely."
Oh yeah.
Like that's not, unless I was sick, that was not something I was going to say no to.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
And then
he went in as an Oriole.
I think it was Oriole, or no, I don't think he had a cap on his. I don't think he had a logo on his cap.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
Like from what
Some guys do that.
Yeah, from what I remember, I thought it just like he's like facing this way on the plaque. He's not looking like straight at you, and there's like I don't think there's anything on the plaque from what I remember.
Oh wow!
It's just there's I don't think there's a Yankee or an Oriole.
Did you get to meet any players while you were there?
I didn't.
Any Hall of Famers?
I didn't get to meet them, but so like during the weekend, there was like two cool moments. We set up the trucks for the parade on Saturday. And so we were at Doubleday Field doing that, and then
this is induction week.
Induction weekend,
right.
Saturday of induction week.
Okay. Saturday induction.
Yeah, we did that. And so the cool thing was, they also had like the award ceremony before they went down, like for the Frick Award and the Spink Award, which was called at the time. So they did that on Doubleday Field, and then they all went off the stage, and then they went in these trucks to go do the parade. So Steve Carlton, one of the Hall of Famers. So he's like walking to his truck, and I can remember this, clear as day. He's trying to walk to his truck, but he keeps stopping at other people's trucks and like just small talking.
Okay. Yeah.
Like when he's trying to they're trying to get the parade going,
Right.
And Ozzie Smith is in like a truck, like a few trucks behind him, and he yells out to Carlton. He says, "Hey, Lefty, get in your truck, it's leaving." and Steve just like did this, like looked at Ozzy and did like this little shimmy, and then like he just walked to his truck, And I was like,
that's a cool moment for
Yeah.
sure.
That, like only you'd probably get to see it. Like
Very few,
very few people. Wow.
And then the second thing on the Sunday of induction day. So like my role during the induction ceremony, like before and during and even after, was help set up and take down the stage.
Yeah.
So the stage was already like built, but like you had to put like the chairs out, and you had to put draping, bunting, and stuff like that. And so that was my thing to do. And then because I did that, I had a special badge that said like all access. Not all the interns had an all access type badge.
Oh, okay.
So like 10 minutes before the induction ceremony was supposed to go on, I went backstage and just chilled for like a minute or two, and I saw Hank Aaron,
Oh my
and
goodness.
along with like all the other Hall of Famers, and I didn't say anything to him. I didn't talk. I didn't have to talk. Didn't have to say anything because I was just there in the moment.
Just there.
Yeah.
Just seeing him. Wow.
Right. And just stood there and just chilled. I'm like, this is great. And then like, even though I had the all access pass, like they still don't want you back there. So like the security guy's like, maybe you should go back out there. I'm like, okay, fine.
Yeah.
So those were the two cool moments. Even though I didn't like get to like shake anybody's hand or say hello, I was just like seeing them that close instead of on the TV was great.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
And Hank Aaron is, Johnny's doctor. When Johnny played baseball, he had to have surgery in his arm, and his doctor had on his wall. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
On his wall, pictures of famous athletes that he worked on, that he met, just incredible wall of fame,
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked him, which one was your favorite, picture and to meet? And he just immediately went to Hank Aaron. He said Hank Aaron was such a gentleman. And obviously, I mean, he's in everybody's top 10 greatest player of all time. You can put him wherever you want. But he just said he was such a gentleman, so kind and giving. Like he talked to you and he shared with you, you know. So I could only imagine just being in his presence was special.
It was, it was definitely a great moment. And going back to your original question about how did I felt after, being at the end of the internship. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I felt I accomplished everything, but at the same time, I was like, I didn't want to leave. Yeah. I didn't want to go back to school.
That's
What do I got to go? Dream. It's like, I don't ever want to wake up from this.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So recently you just got back from a road trip. Could you talk a little bit about, you got to see some baseball on the East Coast, what experiences you had, your time seeing all the games, any cool memories or experiences you had?
Yeah. So the road trip I went on this month or in September, I actually I went to Midwest. It was my Midwest baseball rock and roll road trip.
Awesome. Okay.
Oh, that's right. You did say Midwest. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I did the East Coast earlier in July when going to the induction ceremony.
Right.
But that's another story. We can talk about this. September's more important. So,
for sure.
Yeah.
That was most recent.
So, and I had this plan. I was thinking about this since like February because Billy Joel and Rod Stewart played a concert in Cleveland at the Cleveland Browns Stadium, also known as the Factory of Sadness.
Right.
Yeah. I'm sorry for going off subject, but it was part of the road trip.
No, for sure.
It was the nucleus of the road trip. Right. And so I'm like, okay, I want to see
who coined the phrase "Factory of Sadness." I think I know why they coined it.
Yeah, there's a comedian on YouTube that's a Cleveland Browns fan. I think his name is Mike Polk Jr.
Okay.
And in 2011, he went on this rant outside the stadium, like in the dark. Like it was after a game, and he just goes on this rant. And at the end of the rant, it's like a minute and a half, minute 45 video. He just yells at the stadium. He's outside yelling at the stadium. He's like, "You are a factory of sadness," and it just stuck. I just love that name. But,
for sure.
Yeah, but anyway, just that's the nucleus of the road trip. It's like, okay, well, so this is happening on like Friday, September the 13th, and I found out this back like in February that they were going to do this, and it was the only time. It was the only date that those two were going to play together because all the other dates, Billy Joel's playing with like Sting or Stevie Nicks. I just wasn't that interested in seeing that.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well, is there any? Obviously, it's still baseball season. Minor league baseball still going on, but still in the tail end. Is there anything, are these teams playing? So I saw that the Columbus Clippers in Columbus, Ohio, the AAA team for the Guardians, they were going to be in town that weekend. And, it was like, okay, well, I can go see them September 12th, the day Thursday, and then the concert Friday. And then I really started like, you know what if the Detroit Tigers are in town like that weekend?
Right.
And so I saw it, and they were in town that weekend. They were playing on Saturday, September 14th. I'm like, okay, do the Clippers game, then go on Thursday, go to Cleveland for the concert on Friday, and then Saturday go to Detroit because I've never been to Detroit or Michigan at that time.
Right.
For the Tigers game, and then Sunday when I come home, I can stop in Indianapolis for an Indianapolis Indians game, which is a AAA team for the Pirates.
For the Pirates, right? Okay.
And so it was perfect. And like I have paid time off from my work, so I got off for those days. For Thursday and Friday, I don't have to work Saturday and Sunday, but Right. And so I did that. So September 12th, I went to Columbus, Ohio for a Columbus Clippers game, and their ballpark, Huntington Park, is really nice. They like one of my. They played they played the St. Paul Saints that day.
Okay.
And I think the Saints won, or they were leading anyway. But one thing I like about Huntington Park is the Clippers display like the history of Columbus baseball throughout their park.
Wow.
Like
that's great.
Yeah, just in the concourse, and I'm like, okay, this is fantastic because Columbus has a great baseball history.
Right.
And then after the game, I went to the suburb of Dublin, Ohio, and ate at Urban Meyer's Pint House.
Okay.
Yeah, because I've heard about it and I wanted to try it. I'm not an Ohio State fan, but I was like, I let's try this, and it was good.
Right. When in Rome.
Yeah, when in Rome.
Yeah. Do you remember a little bit about the game? Because there's a local North Alabama player that played as a relief pitcher for that team. Did you remember the name Tanner Burns?
I do remember Tanner Burns. I didn't see him pitch.
Okay, he may not have pitched. He was a relief pitcher. Just to make a connection here, Johnny caught him. They're the same age. Johnny caught him but he was on one of our teams in our garage. When when we head out,
Mhm.
there's a banner of a team that we put together for kind of like a national. It's down in South Carolina, Myrtle Beach.
Yeah.
And Tanner Burns.
Decatur, yeah.
Tanner Burns was on that team, so
Okay.
he's in the Guardians system, AAA.
Yeah.
And I think he's doing well. I think they were ready to call. I thought they were ready to call him up this year. I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
We have to check.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just mentioned it because you were there, and just
Yeah.
a little connection there with with North Alabama.
Yeah, I should. Yeah, I wish he pitched, but I just didn't see him. But,
Yeah.
So the Clippers, another thing, they were in there. A lot of teams, including the Trash Pandas, will do like alternate
Local
Hispanic
team.
uniforms.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I've seen that. Yeah.
So the Clippers that night in particular wore their Hispanic version of their uniforms. The Valero, I think it's the Valeros de Columbus or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And the Trash Pandas are a local minor league team.
Yeah. The Rockets.
AA.
Yeah. Rocket City Trash Pandas in
Mhm.
the Southern League. Yes.
Yeah.
It's just for people who didn't know that.
Yeah. What is their
They're with the Angels.
They're with
Yeah.
the Angels.
Double A the
Double A,
Angels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Angels, right. And but they had a Hispanic night too. I can't
Yeah.
remember when it was.
The Lunaticos.
Lunaticos.
Yeah.
That's it.
So,
We have a family member who works there. She's amazing,
nice.
and they do a great job there too. Did you go to a lot of their games?
I do. Yes.
Yeah.
Halsey does their supplies their concession stands.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so we'll get tickets every now and then. Even if I don't get tickets from work, I'll find a way to get tickets. Because I enjoy going to the games.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
How many games do you go during the season?
I try to go at least between 5 to 10.
Yeah.
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 Definitely.
Yeah. It just depends on the promotions, or if the Halsey has a if Halsey has tickets, or like one time my friend and fellow Hall of Fame intern, his brother was playing for the visiting Birmingham Barons.
Right.
And so he was going to be in town that week to see him, like that weekend, see him play. So I was like, this is perfect. Go to games, go see my friend, go see my friend's brother play. I mean, it's fantastic. It's a win-win,
Right.
But going back to the trip, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No.
So that was Thursday. Friday, I went to Cleveland. I stopped in Massillon, Ohio, to see a museum called the Massillon Museum, and I went there in July as I was going up to Cooperstown to see an exhibit about an art in the deadball era. Like this guy named Jerry Kalbach, he did portraits of different deadball era stars throughout the. I think he did like 37 of these portraits altogether, and it was on display in the Massillon Museum in July. So I saw that, and it was great. And then I went back to the Massillon Museum again because I just thought I didn't have a lot of time to see it in July. I figured I had more time to do it just to kill between the concert.
Right.
And it was great, and it's free too. Like they don't charge admission.
Oh wow.
So
Yeah.
I
They
like,
take donations. Or
yeah, they
something?
take donations. They have a gift shop and whatnot. So
That's like the Birmingham Southern League Museum.
Mhm.
yeah, Negro Southern Museum. Yeah,
Legally, yeah.
Yeah.
That was a fun one. We like that. Well, if we can, let's segue into I think based on what you told me again when we first met, I had asked Matthew, what's your favorite part of the history of baseball, and you mentioned the dead ball era. So you kind of segued into it yourself.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
what? Tell me what your fascination is with that era and why it's your favorite. And because I will tell you this, that's when I knew you. I introduced you as a local baseball expert, and that's when I knew, boy, this guy is learned, well read, and really he just eats this stuff up, because the stuff that you were telling me at that at that meeting was amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it just started with being young and watching Ken Burns' documentary Baseball.
Right, it was amazing.
Yeah, I think that was I didn't see the 1800s episode first. I think I just went to the 1900s episode, and just to me, just watching how different baseball was then compared to now, and then learning that the Oakland A's started in Philadelphia, of all places, as the Philadelphia Athletics.
Wow. Connie Mack.
Yeah, Connie Mack and all of them, and then just learning about rivalry, like early rivalries, like the New York Giants and the Chicago Cubs had a rivalry in the early 1900s.
Right.
And I was like, okay. So the Giants weren't in San Francisco all this time. And another revelation as a kid,
Right.
Yeah.
And then and then they talked about Cobb in there. I'm like, okay, well, this guy seems fascinating. And being from the South, I'm like, okay, he's a Southerner like myself,
Right.
just
Georgia Peach,
yeah. And then like going from there, it's like, okay, and then like the uniforms were different, and like one thing I loved is just they always wore they always wore socks, even now, but like their uniforms were like different because like the legs would
stirrups.
Stirrups, and like the pants leg would just come up here. It wouldn't go all the way down.
Right.
So they showed the socks off more.
Right.
I've always liked that look, and I hate to sound old school, but I would prefer if players today just showed their socks more.
Yeah, classic.
Right.
Yeah. It's just I've always been like
Who does that now? Did they give him a choice?
Judge kind of has his pants up.
Yeah, Judge and John Carlos Stanton does sometimes.
Right.
It just
bigger guys, yeah.
Yeah, it just depends on the player. But I've always, even when I played Babe Ruth, Little League and Babe Ruth baseball, I've always showed the socks. So
we do like that look.
It is a classic look.
It is a classic look.
Yeah.
So once you kind of, like you said, you learned about the Athletics, started in Philadelphia, and then the Giants weren't always. So you started getting into it. Did you have? Obviously, you mentioned Ty Cobb. He's your favorite player.
Yeah.
Favorite team that you love to learn about, like John McGraw's Giants were on top for a while. Connie Mack had some great teams.
I think both those teams were fun to learn about, especially Connie Mack and the A's, because a few years ago, and I told you this at the coffee shop, there's this guy named Norman Mocht who wrote like a 3-volume biography on Connie Mack.
Right.
Right.
You did tell me that, yeah.
And so like reading that later on as like, in my 20s and even, it's just in my 20s, it's like, this guy, Norman Mocht spent like 30 years writing this book. And the thing is, like with the Philadelphia Athletics, Connie Mack and the Philadelphia Athletics are synonymous with one another.
Yes.
Because Connie Mack was a part of the A's in one way or another from their beginning, 1901 to 1954, their last season in Philadelphia. So writing a book about Connie Mack is also writing a book about the Philadelphia Athletics.
Wasn't the deadball era, but their 29 team was one of the greatest of all time.
Yeah, I think even like in the 90s, like the Sports Illustrated had a cover story about it, about the 29 A's.
We didn't really talk about them a lot in the greatest teams of all time. We missed them, but I went back and looked at all the different Hall of Famers that were on that team, and then obviously Connie Mack managed them, and then they were right smack in the middle of the Yankees run, 27, all that in the early 30s, and they beat. I want to say they beat the Yankees that year by like 8 games or something. Like it wasn't even close that year.
Yeah,
so they must have been pretty good.
Yeah, they had all the talent.
But that was just into the live ball era. So back to the dead ball era.
Yeah.
Tell me about what you learned about the parks back then, because weren't these like I remember my grandfather used to talk about how different the parks were. Even the Giants played in Manhattan, where they
the Polo
played.
Grounds.
The Polo Grounds.
Yeah.
So that was a strange one, right? It was like 480 to center, and then it was like 260 to left. Like,
it was like it was.
What did you read?
So just the Polo Grounds just being a weird shape. And there's like 3 or 4 different versions of it. The original version was actually in Central Park in the 1880s.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, and they actually played polo there before they did baseball. That's where the name came from. Yeah. And then I think in 1890 they moved to they moved farther into Manhattan. Actually, it's actually in Harlem, if you can believe that. Yeah. And so they just found a plot of land there, I think in 1890 or something like that, and they built the wooden grandstand,
right?
And it was just an odd shape because in the shape that they were in, the land that they were in,
right.
And then being behind Coogan's Bluff, this little overlook,
right.
And then that stadium burned down in 1911, and the Giants spent most of the 1911 season playing at They weren't the Yankees in 1911. They're called New York Highlanders.
Right.
They played at Hilltop Park, which was another wooden ballpark farther up Manhattan, and I think in the Washington Heights neighborhood or something like that.
Right.
And then they rebuilt the Polo Grounds to be wooden and concrete, just like Shibe Park in Philadelphia and Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, which I'm wearing a Forbes Field T-shirt. So, the ballparks were different, and they were just fascinating. Like reading about the first World Series and how they weren't even called the Red Sox then. They were called in 1903. They were the Positive Pilgrims or Americans or something like that. Playing at the Huntington Avenue grounds.
Yeah,
and I'm like, they didn't play at Fenway Park in 1903. There was no Fenway Park in 1903.
Right.
And just the odd dimensions just fit the neighborhoods that they were in.
Right. That makes sense.
It's not. Yeah, it's not like like when the Birmingham Barons moved to Hoover in 1988 and played at the Hoover Met in a suburb.
Right.
You played in the city. You found a plot of land to build the ballpark somehow, and you somehow fit the dimensions to fit the neighborhood.
To fit the neighborhood.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Which makes them more unique. Which makes the park more unique in itself.
Yeah.
It's not like with the cookie cutter stadiums in the 70s where they just had like just the circular dimensions. It added to the ball. It added to the neighborhood. It added to the flavor of the ballpark and the most uniqueness of the ballpark.
So, which one was your favorite? Do you have a favorite? When you look, I mean, obviously you didn't visit them, but just from what you read, you're like, boy, that would have been fun to.
I would say Shibe Park in Philly.
Yeah.
Because the ball, like the outside is so unique. It was so unique. The turret, or like the entrance to the ballpark just looks so unique. And then across, at least until the 30s, they had like fans across the street watching games from the rooftops, like they do now at Wrigley Field.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So you could do it from like this right, center and right field stand. You can see it from the center right field wall.
Right.
And and even going back, even Wrigley Field, and of course the history before that, which even in the deadball era, like I mentioned before, there was a third major league for a couple of years, and Wrigley Field was called Weigman Park when it was built in 1914 after the Federal League team's owner, Charles Weigman,
right,
which they were called, at least before, they were called the Chicago Federals. In the last season, they were called the Chicago Whales, which I'm wearing a Chicago Whales hat right now. So,
right.
Yeah. And so just, the ballparks in like Forest Field, just so deep. It was like Forest Field also had like ivy on the outfield wall, just like Wrigley Field did.
Right.
And just being just so cavernous, it's so big that you could, University of Pittsburgh played their football games there in the 1910s and 20s when they were really good, in football. It's just so fascinating, just the dimensions and whatnot.
Do you think that any of this or these stadiums that have like such unique like looks to them, they're constructed based on their surroundings, do you think we're missing an aspect of that in the stadiums that are more? I mean, we're going to be having the Las Vegas Athletics here soon, and it's going to be so modern. I mean, how do you add such like a touch of the Rickey Henderson Field to such a modern place like that, or at least incorporate some aspect of the Philadelphia Athletic? Because you got to kind of give a nod to the past. Like, a lot of these stadiums, like I like what they did with Turner and Truist. You can walk around the stadium and find little tidbits. Mm-hmm. But do you think we are missing an aspect of that, just look of the fields nowadays?
I would say so.
Yeah.
Especially going to be now Las Vegas Athletics. Mm-hmm. When you look at the renderings of their stadium, what they want to do, I mean, let's be honest, it looks like a snowball, like a snow globe.
Yeah.
And it's good to be futuristic, but I think you were losing that. Now in the 90s, when the retro looking ballpark got into fashion with Camden Yards and Jacobs Field and whatnot, they gained some of that back.
Right.
Especially the Rangers' old ballpark, the ballpark in Arlington, which I've been to like twice, and I love the architecture of it because it's so different from all the other classic looking ballparks built in the 90s. Because it just, in the way that they have like Texas stuff and like engraved into the outer wall before as you go into the stadium, it's just like this. And it just the porch, like they had the right field porch. It was similar to like Tiger Stadium in Detroit, the way it hangs out like that. Mm-hmm. Those are things that I love seeing, especially in the 90s era ballparks that you don't see today. Don't get me wrong, I do love the modern ballparks, especially even the retractable roof ones. Yeah. Like I've been to Globe Life Field in Texas last year, and it felt weird. It felt like when I was walking around the concourse, it felt like I was in a shopping mall or like in the airport. It was just so different,
Right.
I feel like going back, I feel like we're just losing that unique aspect to it with the modern ballpark, with the 2020 ballparks.
Speaking of unique and just getting back to the baseball that day, it's fascinating to talk about the stadiums too.
Yeah.
But the baseball that day, I can't get my head around like the 1906 Cubs, like their starting pitching their ERAs were all like 1s and 2s. And then you had guys like Ty Cobb who were hitting 400. I'm just trying to get my head around like the type of baseball that they were playing. Did you see when you were studying it, big dichotomy? You had like those Chicago teams that were just so dominant pitching wise.
Yeah.
The Christy Mathewsons that were just absolutely, I mean, you've never seen numbers like Christy Mathewson.
No.
And yet you had hitters that could hit 400. Were there not a lot of them, or were these guys just so unique and the rest of the era was more about pitching? Like, tell me, just give me that feel so I can feel like I understand that era better.
Yeah. I feel like you played a lot of small ball.
Right.
That was the majority thing. And they did a lot of hit and run and a lot of emphasis of stealing bases, hit and runs, and doing what they called like the Baltimore chop, which is like you just hit
That's
it.
where that came.
You
Okay.
hit it hard on the you hit the ball, try to hit it hard like onto the infield,
Like
and then
you
like
tomahawk it
and just go up, and then try to get over a fielder's head and then try to get on base that way.
Right.
It was more about that. There were some 400ers like Cobb and Nap Lajoie, but
that's how you say it.
Yeah, I think I was thinking before.
Yeah, Lajoie. Yeah, but I feel like you had more 400 hitters like going in the live ball era till Ted Williams.
Gotcha.
Like
Honus Wagner in that.
Yeah,
he played both though.
No, Honus Wagner only played in dead ball era.
Only dead ball.
He played from 1897 to 1917.
Pirates,
right. Okay.
Now,
and what's the delineation from dead ball to live? Like around 1915?
1920.
1920.
Yeah, 1920, 1921, somewhere around there. They did something to the ball, but offense was just low. They didn't score a lot of runs. There were a lot of closer games.
Right.
And pitching was dominant. And, of course, pitchers went 9 innings or they went extra innings.
Right.
There wasn't a relief pitcher. They paid you to pitch all 9 innings. And
more,
and then maybe the stamina of the pitchers then are just different than it is now.
Got to imagine they paced themselves, and they could play with the dirty ball and the scuff ball and the shine ball and all that stuff. So I'm imagining
spitball.
Yeah. I'm imagining that they found a way to get through the innings,
and,
without a 100-mile-an-hour fastball.
Yeah, and a lot of games then were less than 2 hours, and you didn't have television then, and you didn't have radio broadcast till like 1921.
Right.
So you could get a game pretty quickly. I mean, like, I guess teams got out there pretty quick in between innings and just did very quick warm-ups, and they were just ready to go.
Wow.
From what I understand. A lot of action. And just, so you could hit 400. There were 300 hitters, obviously, and there were 400 hitters in that era, but pitching was just dominant, and just, people were just not going for home runs. I mean, with the exception of a Phillies player in the 1910s called Gavin Cravath, who somehow hit double-digit home runs and led National League in home runs from 1912 to 1920, and he actually hit 24 in 1915, and that was eye-boggling then.
Okay.
Wow.
So maybe you don't really hear it.
Yeah.
Wow.
He's not in the Hall of Fame,
so
but
that helps me understand it a lot better. The way you put it. So the dead ball era, I mean, we can talk about this for hours.
Right.
The dead ball era is an amazing era. And you read that, I don't know how many pages that book was. You said took the guy 30 years to write.
Yeah.
That must have been just a page like, wow. Like it was amazing.
Like I said, as I told you, I feel like it's like the Wild West of baseball.
Right. For sure.
Definitely. So different.
I'm going to ask you, but this is a surprise question.
Okay.
But I've always wanted to ask Johnny this, and I'm going to ask you this too. You can go first.
Okay.
You have one day, you go back in a time machine, one day in the history of baseball that you want to see, experience, even interact. What day is that?
That's a great question. There's
Put you on the spot, but just what comes to mind? One day you get the entire day to go back in the time machine and go to one day in the history of baseball. You're at the ballpark or wherever it is that you want to go.
Yeah.
Where do you go?
That's a great question. I would say October 1st, 1970, which was Shibe Park, Connie Mack State, which then was called Connie Mack Stadium's last game, and the chaos that ensued after the game.
Right.
Which the Phillies won in 10 innings against the Montreal Expos, I think 2-1.
Okay.
And then it was just a madhouse because all the fans stormed the field to get souvenirs.
Right.
And some of them just
So you want to be part of that history.
I want to see that. Yeah.
You want to see that. For me, I'll let you think about this.
Okay.
For me, I don't know why I've had dreams about it. I go back to the 1951 World Series, the Yankees and the Giants. Willie Mays hits a pop-up between Joe DiMaggio and Mickey Mantle, who's playing right field. And there's a drain that's not covered. And Mickey Mantle gets his spikes caught in the drain and blows his knee out completely. And he's never the same player. And he was obviously a Hall of Fame player. He could never run quite as fast. And he had knee problems his whole career. So I would go back, tell him to cover that drain so he could continue that World Series and see what kind of ball player he was. Because my dad used to talk about him, like when he came up, he ran to first base from the left side in 3.0 seconds. And they have it, you can actually go on YouTube and see from the moment he goes to when he touches. I think that's what I saw. But the fastest of anybody in the history of the game, which is incredible to hear. How about you?
We're both biased because we're Yankees, so I'll make mine quick. But mine was Jeter's last home game where he gets the walk-off hit. And yeah,
great moment,
like
cool
14.
moment.
So
Yep.
yeah,
The script is written. That's what Michael Kay said.
He's my favorite player of all time.
So the last game where he walk off hit. That's great.
It was just classic.
Well, I always wanted to ask that, and so you went right to. I knew you would. I knew there was a million things going through your head, but you picked one. You did too. I appreciate that. I want. We just got news today, and we have to mention it that Pete Rose died literally within the hour of filming this podcast. So we don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but I wanted to get your thoughts on Pete Rose. Being a big Ty Cobb fan, I'm interested to know, how did you feel about Pete, the Hall of Fame thing? Give me just a short, in honor of Pete and what he did for the game. And you can say what you want about him, but he did a lot for the game, being the hit king. What can you share with us and your thoughts on Pete's passing?
Well, I just don't think anybody could take away what he did on the field.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, his stats speak for himself. He is the all-time hit king, and he somehow managed to stay healthy to play as long as he did, to play in all those games that he did, to reach 4,000 hits, 4,256 hits,
right,
and pass Cobb, and that takes a lot of stamina and a lot of finding ways to get in the game. And that's something I can admire, and just the way he hustled. He's Charlie Hustle. I mean, I think Whitey Ford gave him that nickname.
He did. We talked about it on one of the podcasts.
Yeah. So, just nobody can ever take away what he brought to the field in those great Reds teams in the 70s. And even he played for the Phillies in 1980 when they won the World Series, with Mike Schmidt and all them. And of course, gambling, you just don't do that. And you should not do that in baseball. Even now, with all these sports books opening up in ballparks now, it's just like, if you are, if you're with the team, if you're employed by the team in some capacity, you really shouldn't bet on baseball. And I hate because I personally want him to be in the Hall of Fame with his stats.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Same thing with like Shoeless Joe Jackson, but like you can't. Baseball has strict rules. The Hall of Fame has strict rules, and I just don't see it happening. Maybe in time those rules change.
Right.
Back in 2015 when Manfred became commissioner, Rob Manfred, I remember Pete Rose doing his case, and this is when Pete was doing like the Fox Sports baseball stuff.
Right. I remember it.
He was getting back in the public eye, and I remember Manfred's statement, I think, saying like, "Oh, well, I reviewed Pete's case, and yeah, he's sorry for bet for baseball, but like he still bets on other things even into his 70s, like something along those lines. It's like he's still betting on stuff, and I can't really trust him, or something like the gist of that."
He's incorrigible. I mean, rest his soul. He definitely. I don't know that he ever really handled it the way that he should have or could have, and I think that if he had handled it differently, that they might have allowed him in, or they might have given him more serious consideration. I mean, players like Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan was a fan of his before he passed. He was trying to help him out. Johnny Bench, very strict.
Yeah.
But everybody will tell you, you walk into a clubhouse in any Major League Baseball stadium, it'll say, you should not bet on baseball. I mean, it's prominent. It's something that it's not like, oh, I forgot or whatever. So it is. I certainly understand that part of it, and the fact that you were at the internship at the Cooperstown in Hall of Fame, I'm sure that there's a reverence to that place, and so unfortunately, Pete didn't really. It was like the number one rule.
Yeah.
I mean, they've got people in the Hall of Fame that were probably womanizers and gamblers themselves, but not caught and not for baseball and all that. But Pete, unfortunately, he just didn't. I don't know. Like you said, it would have been great to see him in the Hall of Fame for what he did for the game.
Yeah,
So.
and I should say this, even though he is not enshrined in Cooperstown in the plaque gallery, there are artifacts of Pete Rose's in the collection.
Right.
So
that's a good point.
He is represented in the hall for his artifacts.
Right.
So it's not like, the hall just got rid of it.
That's a great point. I'm glad you said that.
He is a part of he will always be a part of the history of the game.
Right.
And all of the great success he's had. So there are artifacts in the hall in the collection, like in the collections, as well as even on display. I can't think of a specific artifact on the top of my head, but there are. He is represented in the halls.
Right.
Same thing with Shoeless Joe. He's represented in the hall too. So,
Well, I appreciate you saying all that. I don't know if you have any final thoughts on Pete before we wrap it up.
Don't have any final thoughts on Pete, but I actually quick thoughts on the latest Hall of Famees. You got Beltray, Maurer, and Helton.
Todd Helton. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All three of them. Like a quick, little snippet of what did you think?
Well, I thought that all three of them deserved to get in, and I knew eventually Todd Helton was going to get in. Although I felt like at times playing in Colorado his whole career, people want to try to beat down his numbers. But it's like, dude, he could play at Coors Field and he could play everywhere else.
For
Definitely, sure.
Yeah. So you like all three of those?
I liked all three of them, and I like Jim Leland too. So yeah,
absolutely great manager.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, great.
Yeah. I thought it was a good class, definitely, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, people going back to 2019. I'll be brief. Some people didn't think that Harold Baines should have gotten the Hall of Fame. I've heard that a lot from friends and family and whatnot, and I'm just like, he got in. Who cares?
Yeah. Monster power.
You can dig in on all these guys, but no, I appreciate you sharing that. That wraps it up.
Yeah.
I mean, you really came through with when I said you were a baseball expert.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I knew that you were, but boy, you certainly proved it today with just kind of some of the things that you talked about, and right off the top of your head, you knew a lot of details. So
I didn't even know the A's were starting in Philadelphia. That was something right there.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head.
So thank you for watching, listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.